Okay, now that we know what the utility maximizing choice looks like, we have almost everything we need to derive a demand curve. So, we need a series of utility maximizing choices. And how do we get a series of utility maximizing choices? Well, we simply make a new choice every time the price of the good changes. And that gives us the relationship between the price of the good and the quantity we consume, which is a demand curve. So, we have two goods, x and y. Let's suppose we want to derive the demand curve for x. Then we need the price of x to change so that we can then determine what happens to our consumption of x. So let's look at two goods. In this case, we have beer on the x-axis, chips on the y-axis. And I want to know what happens to my consumption of beer when the price of beer falls. So, in this picture, we have three budget constraints, three indifference curves. We're starting out at point A. So, we're starting out on this budget constraint, and point A is the utility maximizing choice. Then, the price of beer falls. And when the price of beer falls, what happens is the budget constraint is going to pivot out this way. We can now afford more beer. And our new choice is going to be B. So we buy more beer and we buy more chips in this case. Finally, the price of beer falls again, and once again the budget constraints pivot out. We then choose point C. So, now that we have three utility maximizing choices, we want to graph the relationship between the price of beer and the quantity of beer. On this graph, we have quantity of beer here, but of course, chips is on the y-axis, not the price. So, we're going to go from this graph to a new graph. And our new graph is below. So on the top, we have the same graph as on the previous slide. On the bottom graph, we have, again, quantity of beer, but now we have the price of beer instead of chips. However, the two graphs are related. So we chose A first, and that is the same quantity at this point on the demand curve. So choice A corresponds to a point on the demand curve, has the same quantity of beer, and the initial price of beer. Then point B, after the price of beer has fallen, corresponds to this price on the demand curve at the lower price. And then finally, point C corresponds to this point on the demand curve at an even lower price. So every utility maximizing point gives us a point on the demand curve. And we join those points together, and that is our demand curve. Now, it could be a straight line. It's usually not. I've just drawn it that way in this case to keep it simple. So this is an individual person's demand curve for beer. And the only thing left to do is to talk about the market demand curve for beer. So that's really easy to get once we have everyone's individual demand curve. So here we have a two-person economy, just to keep it really simple. So we have Mary and we have John. And we know, say at a price of 30, that Mary buys 3 and John buys 2. So all we have to do is add up Mary and John's consumption at all possible prices. And we know that at 30, that will be a total of 5. So we do that at all possible prices, and we end up with a downward sloping market demand curve.